There's a reason someone you love suddenly shuts down without explanation. There's a reason a confident man cracks under pressure. There's a reason someone smiles while secretly falling apart. This book isn't about tricks to sound smarter. It's not about surface-level charisma. It's about what really shapes human behavior, from the subconscious fears people carry to the invisible wounds they protect. This is your path to mastering the deeper side of people, not to manipulate them, but to connect with them, to move with clarity, and to live with power. You're about to unlock what most never see. And once you do, conversations change, relationships shift, influence becomes effortless. Because when you understand what drives people, you stop reacting, and you start responding with precision. So if you're ready to see through the surface and master human behavior and social intelligence from the inside out, subscribe, stay locked in, and let's go deep. Now, let's begin where all understanding begins. Not with others, but with ourselves. Chapter 1. Beneath the Surface. Why people do what they do. Every behavior you witness is a signal. It may come wrapped in silence, sarcasm, aggression, or even charm, but underneath all of it is a pattern trying to survive. Most people think they're seeing someone's personality. What they're really seeing is someone's past, someone's defense system, someone's invisible pain acting out in real time. That's where the true study of human behavior begins. Not with judgment, but with curiosity.
You see a person explode over something small.
You might think, overreacting. But look closer. Maybe that explosion isn't about this moment at all. Maybe it's the weight of 100 unspoken moments finally breaking through. That's not overreaction. That's overflow. Understanding human behavior means accepting that what you're seeing is rarely the whole picture. The smile may be hiding fear. The silence may be screaming for help. The confidence may be holding up insecurity like scaffolding around a broken structure. And the moment you begin to see that, you stop engaging with people's masks and start connecting with their reality. Most behavior is protective. A person who talks too much might be terrified of silence because in their past, silence meant danger. A person who avoids eye contact might not be rude. They might be conditioned by shame. A person who tries to dominate every room they enter, they're likely terrified of being seen as powerless again. Behavior is rarely about the present. It's a pattern built from everything that came before. When you begin to study behavior, truly study it, not from a distance, but with emotional depth, you start seeing yourself in others. Their fear is familiar. Their defense mechanisms are similar. Their overreactions, their silence, their inconsistency, they all begin to make more sense. And once it makes sense, it becomes less personal. You stop internalizing people's moods as your fault. You stop assuming rejection means you're not enough. You stop feeling obligated to fix people's emotions or earn their approval. You realize that most people are simply trying to survive in the only way they know how. Social intelligence starts with emotional neutrality, not coldness, not disconnection, but grounded observation. You learn to read the situation without being consumed by it. You learn to decode tone, tempo, body language, micro-expressions, all the subtle data that people leak without realizing. You start watching how people say things more than what they say. The body doesn't lie. A slight shift in posture, a hesitation before responding, a deep breath before a sentence. These are all clues, and when you train your mind to observe these patterns, you can read more in 5 seconds than others can in 5 years of surface-level conversation. But to reach this level, you have to slow down. You have to train your nervous system, not to jump into reaction, because emotional reactivity clouds perception, and perception is everything in social intelligence. The calmest person in the room usually has the clearest read on the room. When you're grounded, you can notice discomfort before it becomes disrespect. You can sense manipulation before it becomes exploitation. You can feel sincerity before a single word is spoken. This isn't intuition, it's trained awareness. And the training begins with your own behavior. Before you can read others, you must first read yourself. Where do you shut down? What triggers your defense mechanisms? What old wounds still pull you out of alignment? Because until you've mapped your own emotional blueprint, You'll always project your story onto someone else's behavior. Self-awareness is the first gateway. Once you understand your triggers, your defaults, your conditioned responses, you become less likely to be manipulated or misunderstood. You stop reacting to what people say and start responding to what they mean. And meaning is everything. For example, a simple, "I'm fine" can mean 100 different things. With social intelligence, you learn to hear the tone, feel the hesitation, sense the incongruence. You learn to ask the right follow-up, or say nothing, and just be present. You learn that sometimes, silence is the answer that heals. This kind of mastery isn't about being a psychologist. It's about being human, a deeply tuned-in human. Because at the end of the day, the people who win in life aren't always the smartest or loudest. They're the ones who understand others without being controlled by them. The ones who can walk into a room and sense energy. The ones who can de-escalate tension without force. The ones who know when to speak and when to simply listen. And that skill, real, grounded, emotional clarity, is rare because it requires more than words. It requires stillness. It requires emotional discipline. It requires the courage to stay calm when the room is loud, to stay soft when someone else is hard, to stay present when someone else is projecting. They're not always trying to deceive you. They're trying to not be exposed. They're not even trying to control you. They're trying to feel safe in a world that once made them feel small. And when you learn to see people through that lens, your world changes. Conflict becomes a mirror, not a battlefield. Conversations become bridges, not performances. And relationships become growth, not obligation. You stop trying to win arguments. You start trying to understand patterns. You stop expecting people to behave like you. You start honoring who they really are, even if they haven't figured it out yet. That's the beginning of real mastery. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that liberates. Chapter 2. Emotional Triggers. The hidden switches that control behavior. Every human being carries emotional triggers, silent alarms buried deep in the subconscious. They are not obvious. They don't show up as labels or signs. They show up in the heat of the moment, in the way someone shuts down after a certain word, in the way a conversation suddenly collapses without warning, in the tone of voice that shifts the whole energy in the room. Triggers are like old wounds with no scars. They sit under the surface, waiting until something or someone presses just the right spot. And when that happens, the rational mind fades. What remains is reaction, pure, raw, often disproportionate. But to the triggered person, it feels completely justified. It feels real, because it is. The trigger might come from a word, a tone, a gesture, a pattern, a situation. To the outsider, it might seem like an overreaction, but inside the triggered person, it's not just the current moment. They're reliving every moment in the past that felt like this one. They're not reacting to you. They're reacting to what you represent in that instant, a threat to their safety, to their worth, to their control. Understanding emotional triggers is essential if you want to master human behavior, because this is where communication usually breaks down. Two people aren't arguing over facts. They're defending wounds. Two people aren't misaligned in logic. They're misaligned in emotional memory. A raised voice may feel like violence to someone who grew up in chaos. Silence may feel like punishment to someone who was emotionally neglected. A disagreement may feel like abandonment to someone with rejection trauma. This is what makes social intelligence so valuable. It's not just about being polite or well-spoken. It's about sensing when someone's no longer in the room with you, when they've been hijacked by a deeper pain, when they're no longer responding with the present version of themselves, but with a younger, unhealed version trying to protect itself. Most people walk around unaware of their own triggers, and worse, completely blind to the triggers of others. This is why conversations escalate so quickly. This is why people shut down without warning. This is why relationships break, not because of what was said, but because of what was felt underneath. The person with high emotional intelligence learns to pause when others react, not to win, not to dominate, but to read, to observe, to trace the reaction back to its origin. And sometimes, all it takes is a moment of presence to diffuse what could have become war. Where is this really coming from? Big question asked silently in your mind can save relationships, deals, and even lives. Because when you stop reacting to reactions, you become a mirror instead of a match. You reflect calm instead of fueling fire. You offer presence instead of pressure. And people, even if they can't explain it, feel safer around you. That's not weakness. That's power. But this understanding must start with you. You can't navigate other people's emotional triggers if you haven't mapped your own. You have to ask, what sets me off? What tone makes me tighten? What situations make me withdraw, snap, defend, or disappear? These questions lead you inward, and it's not always pretty. You'll find parts of yourself you've hidden. You'll face truths you've avoided. But that's where the real growth lives. Because once you see your own triggers, they lose their control. You catch them, you name them, and eventually, you rewire them. And in rewiring yourself, you gain a rare ability to be the calmest one in the room when everything else is shaking. This kind of control isn't robotic. It's not suppression, it's awareness. It's knowing your emotional wiring so well that you don't need to explode to feel heard. You don't need to shut down to feel safe. You can stay present, even when the storm hits. And that presence, that calm awareness, is magnetic. People trust those who stay grounded. They lean into the ones who can hear beneath the words, feel beneath the tone, and hold space without trying to fix or change or win. Because here's the truth. Most people don't want to be corrected. They want to be understood. They want to feel seen. And when someone understands their triggers, not to manipulate, but to create safety, walls come down. Real connection happens. Now imagine walking through the world with that skill. Imagine leading a team and knowing when your words are activating someone's shame response. Imagine being in a relationship and recognizing when your partner isn't mad, just scared. Imagine negotiating and knowing when to push and when to pause, because you can feel the emotional undercurrent shift in real time. This is what mastery looks like. It's subtle. It's internal. It doesn't need volume. It doesn't need titles. But it shifts everything. So here's the work. Watch what triggers you, not just what angers you, but what drains you, what confuses you, what makes you shrink. Then ask, what memory does this connect to? What story am I still believing? What need is going unmet? And when you're with others, listen for their triggers too. You won't always get it right, but the attempt alone, your presence, your sensitivity, your awareness, it opens doors that arguments never could. Because when people feel emotionally safe, they stop performing. They start telling the truth. They start trusting. And in a world where most people are locked in reactive cycles, your ability to pause becomes a superpower. It won't always be easy. You'll still get triggered. You'll still miss signs. You'll still overreact. But with practice, those moments shrink. Your awareness grows. Your presence deepens. And soon, you're no longer moved by every spark. You become the one who holds the light. Quietly, steadily. Chapter 3. The Mirror Effect. What we judge is what we hide. People think they know others. They think their opinions are sharp, that their judgments are fair, that they're simply calling it like it is. But the truth is far more complex, far more personal. Most of what we judge in others is not about them, it's about us. This is what psychologists call projection, but in real life, it feels like misdirected fire. You see someone being loud, and you call them attention-seeking, without realizing it's your own need to be heard that's being triggered. You see someone succeed and feel resentment, not because they've done anything wrong, but because you haven't allowed yourself to chase what you want. We judge in others what we secretly suppress in ourselves. The things we don't allow ourselves to feel, to be, to explore, when we see them outside of us, we attack. Not because we hate those traits, but because we fear them. Because we were taught to hide them, because they remind us of a version of us we buried long ago. And until you face that mirror, you keep living in distortion. Understanding this mirror effect is essential to developing social intelligence. Because once you realize that your reactions say more about you than the person in front of you, you gain clarity, you begin to separate projection from perception, you begin to ask deeper questions. Why does this bother me so much? what inside me is reacting right now. That kind of honesty is hard. It strips you, it humbles you, but it also heals you. Suddenly, the world becomes less threatening. People's differences don't feel offensive. Their confidence doesn't trigger your insecurity. Their silence doesn't feel like rejection. Because you're no longer looking through the cracked lens of your own unprocessed emotion, you're seeing people as they are, not as you fear they might be. But this requires emotional courage. It means holding yourself accountable for your judgments. It means asking not just, why are they like that, but why does this affect me the way it does? Most people won't go there. They'll stay on the surface. It's easier to blame, to label, to gossip. It's easier to call someone toxic than to ask, why do I keep attracting this pattern? But that easy road leads to repetition. Same conflicts, same wounds, different faces. The moment you turn inward and take responsibility for your perceptions, the mirror turns into a map. You begin to see where you need to grow, where you're still hurting, where your inner child is still trying to be safe. And from that place of awareness, your interactions evolve. You stop reacting to people's shadows and start seeing their humanity. You recognize when someone is being defensive, not to attack them, but to understand what they're guarding. You hear someone's sarcasm, and instead of taking offense, you sense the discomfort behind it. You feel someone's judgment, and instead of absorbing it, you see the fear it's masking. This doesn't mean you tolerate everything. It doesn't mean you let people harm you. It means you move through the world with eyes that aren't just looking but seeing, and that vision makes you powerful. Not in a controlling way, but in a calm, unshakable way. Because now, you're no longer swayed by every emotional gust, you're grounded. And from that grounded place, you can listen better, lead better, love better. You start offering people what they've never had, space to be real without being attacked. And when you offer that space to others, something profound happens. You begin to offer it to yourself. You stop judging your past. You stop shaming your fears. You stop hiding your desires. You accept your full humanity. And in that acceptance, because judgment freezes growth, but compassion fuels it. And once you step out of judgment, you begin to move through life differently. Your silence becomes stronger than their noise. Your empathy becomes louder than their anger. Your clarity becomes more valuable than their approval. People might not understand you. They might even project their unhealed parts onto you. But you'll see it for what it is, a reflection of where they are, not where you need to go. And in that awareness, you find peace. Not because the world is soft, but because you become softer with yourself. And that softness, that grounded stillness, gives you power beyond words. You become someone who no longer needs to be right, just present. You become someone who no longer seeks to fix others, just to understand them. You become someone who no longer needs to be understood to feel whole, because you've made peace with your own reflection. And from that place, you no longer fear what you see in others. You meet them where they are, and rise anyway. Chapter 4. Social Masks. The personalities people wear to survive. No one walks into the world completely exposed. Everyone, in some way, wears a mask. Some masks are subtle, a smile that hides exhaustion, confidence that masks doubt. Others are loud, arrogance that hides fear, control that hides helplessness. But they're all trying to do the same thing: protect the person underneath. From childhood, people begin learning what parts of themselves are accepted and which are rejected. A boy learns that showing sadness invites shame, so he puts on a tough face. A girl learns that being too opinionated draws criticism, so she becomes agreeable. And slowly, over time, people stop showing up as themselves and start showing up as a version the world can tolerate. These masks become habits, and the longer they're worn, the more natural they feel. By adulthood, most people forget they're wearing one. But every so often, when the room is quiet, when no one's watching, when the world stops demanding performance, the real self surfaces, briefly, silently, and then vanishes again. The danger isn't in having a mask, it's in confusing the mask with your identity. This is where relationships often get tangled. People fall in love with the mask, not the person. They praise the version that performs, but ignore the version that aches. And eventually the person wearing the mask feels unseen, not because they were hidden but because they were never truly looked at. To master social intelligence, one must learn to recognize these masks, not with judgment but with compassion. The loudest voice in the room might be the most insecure. The person always giving advice may be desperate to feel needed. The overachiever might be running from a deep fear of failure. The one who never gets angry may be quietly suffocating from repressed emotion. People often wear the opposite of what they feel. And when you understand this, you stop reacting to the presentation and start reaching for the person underneath. That doesn't mean everyone deserves access to your energy, but it means you see them for who they are, not just how they perform. And when you treat people based on that deeper understanding, your influence changes. You're no longer just speaking to their role, you're speaking to their reality. But first, you must face your own mask. What roles have you played to survive? What parts of you did you hide to be accepted? Where did you shrink to make others comfortable? Until you're honest about your own performance, you'll keep demanding authenticity from others while living disconnected from yourself. It's not always easy to peel it back. The mask can feel safer than the truth, because the truth carries risk, rejection, failure, misunderstanding. But the mask carries its own cost: exhaustion, disconnection, a quiet ache that grows louder every year you don't deal with it. Real doesn't mean raw and unfiltered all the time. It means aligned. It means your outside matches your inside. It means you're not constantly shape-shifting to be liked. You're not shrinking your voice to maintain peace. You're not overextending just to prove your worth. And that self, once you reclaim it, becomes your anchor in every room. You walk in, knowing who you are. You speak without chasing approval. You disagree without fearing abandonment. You rest without guilt. You connect without pretending. And when someone shows you their mask, you don't attack it, you understand it, because you've been there too. That's what makes you powerful. Because in a world full of people performing, authenticity feels like oxygen. People will notice it. They may not know why they feel calm around you, why they trust you without explanation, but it's because you've made peace with your real self, and that peace radiates. It quiets the noise in others. And slowly, without trying to change them, your presence gives them permission to take off their mask too. That's real influence. Not controlling others, but holding a space where people can be more of themselves. To get there, you have to let go of the roles that no longer fit. The mask of perfection, the mask of always being fine, the mask of strength that doesn't allow softness, the mask of independence that hides your need to be loved. These masks served you once, they protected you, helped you survive. But survival and peace are not the same. It's time to trade the performance for presence, the script for silence, the applause for alignment. And once you do, you'll realize the person you were trying to become was always waiting beneath the mask. Not perfect, but real. Not loud, but grounded. Not untouchable, but whole. Chapter 5, Reading Between the Lines. Listening to what people don't say. Some of the most powerful things people say are never spoken aloud. They show up in hesitation, in broken eye contact, in a sentence that trails off without finishing, in a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, in a fine that sounds too sharp. These small cracks in communication, these gaps between what's said and what's felt. This is where real understanding lives. Most people only listen to words. But social intelligence begins when you learn to read between the words, to hear tone, to feel tension, to notice pauses, to observe what someone leaves out, what they skip, what they avoid. That's where the truth is buried, not in their statements, but in their silences. Humans are complex, but one thing is universal. When someone doesn't feel safe, they don't speak freely, they protect, they filter, they edit themselves. And the more guarded a person is, the more their real message hides in what they don't say. A conversation is not just about exchanging sentences. It's an emotional dance. Every gesture, every pause, every sigh is part of that rhythm. And when you become sensitive to that rhythm, you begin to feel people, not just hear them. For example, When someone talks about a subject quickly and then shifts topics, you don't need to ask, "What are you hiding?" You already know that subject carries weight. If someone mentions a person but avoids saying their name, there's history there. If their tone changes mid-conversation, the emotional current has shifted. But this awareness only comes when you stop rushing. You have to slow down, not just in speech, but in energy. You must listen not to reply, but to understand. You must stop treating silence as something awkward and start honoring it as part of the message. Silence isn't empty. It's full of information. It might mean hesitation. It might mean pain. It might mean restraint. It might mean someone is searching for the right words or trying to avoid the wrong ones. In those moments, what you do next matters. Do you rush to fill the silence? Do you change the topic to escape discomfort? Or do you hold space quiet, calm, steady, and let the silence say what the person couldn't? Because sometimes, it's not your job to get an answer. It's your job to hold presence. That kind of listening is rare. The best listeners in the world don't always say the right things, but they make people feel safe to say the hard things. And that feeling, emotional safety, is the single greatest gift you can offer someone who's been through pain. You don't create that safety by knowing everything. You create it by being something. A steady presence in a noisy world. A person who doesn't flinch when the truth comes out. A person who doesn't interrupt. A person who doesn't need to fix everything. Just understand it. That's where real connection begins. And ironically, that's also where people begin to open up. The more you listen to what isn't said, the more others begin to say what they've never shared before. Because they sense something different in you, not curiosity, but clarity, not pressure, but peace. You're not trying to extract. You're not trying to expose. You're just listening with your whole presence. In that presence, people drop their armor, and you begin to see the parts of them even they've tried to forget. This skill doesn't come from books. It comes from heartbreak, from watching people lie not because they want to deceive, but because truth has cost them too much in the past, from watching someone laugh while holding back tears, from watching strong people fall apart in front of you because for once they feel safe enough to. And when you've witnessed that, you stop asking loud questions. You start asking with your eyes. You start hearing with your body. You start feeling what people mean, not just what they say. That doesn't mean you fix them. It means you honor them. That doesn't mean you absorb their pain. It means you recognize it without running from it. Because that recognition alone, being seen, truly seen, is more powerful than any advice. We live in a world full of talkers, but what we need more of is listeners. Not passive, silent bodies, but active, steady hearts. People who understand that the loudest part of a conversation is often the part that wasn't said. And when you become one of those people, you change everything. One conversation at a time. One silence at a time. One understanding at a time. Chapter 6. The stories people tell themselves.
Every person you meet is living inside a story.
Not the one they post on social media. Not the one they tell others, but the one they tell themselves. Silently, repeatedly, sometimes without even realizing it. These stories shape how they see the world. More importantly, they shape how they see themselves. I'm not good enough. People always leave me. I have to prove my worth. If I show weakness, I'll lose respect. These aren't just thoughts. These are scripts, deep-rooted, emotional narratives, written long ago, often in childhood, often during moments of pain or fear. And once those scripts are internalized, they start to guide everything: decisions, reactions, relationships, even dreams. Someone who grew up being criticized may carry the story that they're never enough. So no matter how much praise they receive, it feels empty. Someone who was abandoned early in life may believe everyone will eventually walk away. So they either push people away first, or they cling too tightly and sabotage the connection. These behaviors may seem irrational on the surface, but they make perfect sense inside the story they're living. To truly understand human behavior, you must learn to listen for the story behind the strategy. People don't just act out, they act from fear, from memory, from survival. And those stories run deep. The successful executive who can't rest, not because he loves work, but because he fears becoming irrelevant. The woman who always rescues others, not because she's selfless, but because helping is the only way she knows to feel needed. The friend who disappears when things get too deep, not because they don't care, but because vulnerability was once dangerous. These stories become identity, and identity is powerful. People will fight to protect their identity, even if it's painful, because pain feels safer than the unknown. The mind would rather stay in a predictable prison than step into unfamiliar freedom. That's why change is so hard, not because people don't want better, but because they've been wired to believe better isn't possible for them. This is where social intelligence takes a new shape, not just as awareness of others, but as compassion for what they carry. You start asking, what story is this person living inside? What memory are they reliving through this behavior? And then you stop trying to fix them. You start honoring their humanity. You speak with more care. You confront with more empathy. You listen with more depth. Because now you understand most people aren't trying to hurt you, they're trying to protect themselves. Even if the protection looks like anger, distance, coldness, or chaos. But to reach this level, you must face your own story first. What are you telling yourself? That you're not lovable unless you achieve. That success is selfish. That if you rest, you'll fall behind. That vulnerability is weakness. That people only care when you perform. These stories run silently in the background, guiding every word you say, every risk you avoid, every boundary you break. And until you expose the story, you stay locked in the same loops. You date the same types of people. You sabotage your own peace. You chase things that don't feed you. You push away what's good because it doesn't match what you think you deserve. But once you name the story, it begins to lose power. You start recognizing, this isn't me, this is something I learned. You pause before reacting and ask, is this true, or just familiar? You catch the lie mid-sentence and whisper, not anymore. That's how transformation begins. Not through force, but through awareness. Not through control, but through choice. You rewrite the script. And as you rewrite your own, you give others permission to question theirs. You begin to speak in a way that awakens people, not shames them. You relate to pain without carrying it. You become someone who doesn't just sound wise, but feels safe. Because you've done your own work. Because you know what it's like to live inside a broken belief. And because now you're learning to live beyond it. Everyone is telling themselves a story, but not everyone knows they can change the ending. That's your role, not to write their story, but to remind them it's possible. And to remind yourself, yours is still being written too. Chapter 7, Validation. The silent hunger driving human behavior. At the root of almost every decision, every reaction, every pursuit, there is a hidden craving. The need to feel seen. The need to be understood. To be acknowledged. To matter. Whether someone admits it or not, validation shapes how they speak, how they dress, how they post, how they love. This need isn't weakness, it's human. From the moment we are born, we look into the eyes of others to learn if we are safe, if we are loved, if we are enough. And as we grow, if that sense of worth isn't anchored deeply inside, we start looking for it everywhere outside. Some seek validation through achievement, stacking titles, trophies, numbers, always chasing the next milestone. Others seek it through relationships, needing constant affirmation to feel secure. Some find it in performance, always being the funny one, the strong one, the helpful one, because silence feels like invisibility. And then there are those who pretend they don't need it at all. The I don't care what people think mask. The hardened self-sufficiency. But behind that wall is often a wound, an unmet need that became too painful to keep expressing. Validation isn't the problem. The problem is how and where people seek it. When worth depends entirely on approval, it becomes fragile. A single rejection can feel like collapse. A moment of being unseen can feel like abandonment. A bad day can erase years of self-trust. And so people adapt. They adjust their personality, mute their desires, contort their identity to gain the approval they crave. But every time they do, they lose a little more of themselves. They become liked, but not known, praised, but not understood, accepted, but not free. That's the trade-off. And that's the quiet crisis. To master human behavior, you must learn to see this hunger for what it is, not as vanity, but as survival. People are not addicted to likes. They're addicted to feeling visible. They're not obsessed with being right. They're terrified of being forgotten. They don't need constant attention. They need to know their existence makes a difference. The mistake isn't trying to remove this need entirely. You can't. Even the most grounded people still appreciate being seen, being appreciated, being loved. The goal is not to kill the desire, but to stop being owned by it. That begins with self-validation. When someone begins to anchor their worth internally, everything changes. They start expressing without performance. They begin making decisions without people-pleasing. They rest without guilt. They say no without explaining. They chase growth without needing anyone to clap. Because now, the need to be seen by others no longer outranks the need to be true to themselves. That's real power. It doesn't mean they become cold or disconnected. It means they can enter a room and not shrink. It means they can lose applause and not lose direction. It means they can be misunderstood and still stand grounded. The more someone validates themselves internally, the more magnetic they become externally. Because authenticity is rare, and people feel it. It's calming. It's trustworthy. It's deeply attractive, not in a superficial way, but in a soulful way. You become someone who gives others permission to stop performing too. That's social intelligence in its purest form. To become so rooted in your own worth that you no longer seek constant proof of it. And by doing so, you reflect that worth back to others. Because here's what most people miss. And the more validation they naturally give, they don't compete. They celebrate. They don't dominate. They empower. They don't withhold praise. They offer it freely. Because they're not threatened by others shining. They're too busy honoring their own light. So, if you want to understand people deeply, listen for what they're really asking beneath their words. When someone boasts, they're often asking, "Do I matter?" When someone overshares, they're asking, "Do you see me?" When someone overworks, they're asking, "Am I enough yet?" And sometimes, the greatest gift you can offer is not advice, not correction, but simple presence. A look that says, "I see you." A silence that says, "You're safe." A voice that says, "You don't have to prove anything here." Because when someone feels seen, they soften. And when they soften, they begin to return to themselves. Chapter 8, Boundaries. The invisible lines that protect inner peace. Some people think boundaries are walls. That they're about pushing others away, that they're cold, selfish, or rude. But the truth is this: boundaries are bridges. They protect peace, preserve identity, and make connection possible, because real connection can't exist without safety. Every person has a limit, an emotional edge where their capacity ends and their exhaustion begins. But not everyone honors that limit. Most people were never taught to. Instead, they were taught to say yes to avoid guilt, to give until they're empty, to sacrifice peace for approval, and over time, that pattern becomes normal. The breakdown doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes, it's quiet, a slow inner erosion, a loss of clarity, a constant resentment that builds with every yes that should have been a no. And by the time someone realizes it, they're already exhausted, drained, distant from themselves. Boundaries aren't just about saying no to others. They're about saying yes to yourself, yes to energy, yes to clarity, yes to dignity, yes to a life that feels like yours. Social intelligence includes emotional self-respect. You cannot move through the world clearly if you're constantly betraying yourself just to be accepted. You cannot understand others deeply if your own soul is screaming in silence. A boundary is a decision made in private that protects you in public. It sounds like, "I'm not available for that conversation right now. I love you, but I won't tolerate that behavior. That doesn't work for me anymore. I'm not explaining my piece." These aren't attacks, they're reminders. Lines drawn not to divide, but to define. And the clearer the line, the more peaceful the relationship. Because here's the truth. People don't respect confusion. They respect clarity. If you teach people that you'll tolerate disrespect, they'll give you more of it, not out of malice, but because you taught them how to treat you. If you teach people that you'll always say yes, even at your own expense, they'll come to expect it, not because they're evil, but because humans adapt to what's available. Boundaries reset that rhythm. They say, I'm still here. I still care. But I care about myself too. And sometimes that's hard, especially if you've built your identity around being needed, being available, being the one who never walks away. People often think boundaries will ruin relationships, but the truth is, a relationship that dies because you spoke your truth wasn't real to begin with. Because real love makes room for real limits. Real friendship honors your humanity. Real leadership doesn't demand your burnout. Boundaries are not just personal, they're generational. When you learn to hold them, you teach others it's okay to honor themselves too. You become someone who models self-respect, not by preaching it, but by living it. You become someone who shows others how to rest, how to say no, how to make space without guilt. And in a world that constantly demands more, that kind of clarity is revolutionary. But to get there, you must first confront the fear. What will happen if I stop overgiving? If I stop people-pleasing? If I stop explaining every decision? And when you face that fear, you'll realize the answer is simple. You won't lose the people who truly love you. You'll only lose the ones who benefited from your silence.
And their absence?
That's not a loss. It's freedom. Once you build boundaries, you start building a life that doesn't need escape. You stop needing vacations to recover from your routine. You stop needing alcohol to cope with your relationships. You stop needing silence to feel sane, because now peace is built into the structure, and the people who remain, they'll know exactly who they're dealing with. Someone rooted, someone clear, someone who doesn't just love, but also protects their capacity to love well. That is the power of boundaries. Not to push away the world, but to meet it from a place of wholeness. Chapter 9, Emotional Safety. The foundation of every relationship. People think relationships break because of arguments, misunderstandings, or distance. But those are only symptoms. What truly breaks relationships, any relationship, is the absence of emotional safety. Without emotional safety, love feels like walking on glass. Without emotional safety, conversation becomes performance. Without emotional safety, presence feels like pressure. It doesn't matter how much history two people share, or how much they care for each other. If one person doesn't feel safe being fully seen, they begin to hide. They speak less. They edit more. They become cautious. Control. They show up as a version that's easier to digest, but harder to connect with. And once that mask goes up, the real connection begins to die. Emotional safety is not softness. It's not weakness. It's not about avoiding conflict or never making mistakes. It's about this. Can I show you the parts of me I don't show anyone else and still be met with presence, not punishment? That's what everyone is searching for. Not just love, not just attention, but safety. A place where they don't have to earn belonging, where they don't have to hide their wounds, where they don't have to trade authenticity for approval. But here's the hard truth. Most people have never experienced that kind of safety. They've learned that vulnerability invites ridicule, that honesty is risky, that emotion is weakness. So they keep their armor on, even with those they love, and sometimes, especially with those they love, because those are the ones who could hurt them the most. To create emotional safety for someone else, you first have to create it within yourself. You have to be the kind of person who can sit with discomfort, yours and theirs, who can listen without fixing, who can hear without judging, who can hold space without trying to control the outcome. Because safety is not built in one moment. It's built in the hundreds of micro moments where someone feels seen and still chosen. It sounds like, I hear you. It's okay to feel that. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to explain. I still love you. These words may seem small, but they are heavy because they carry something rare in this world. Acceptance without condition. But that level of emotional maturity doesn't come easy. It means choosing curiosity over control, compassion over criticism, presence over perfection. It means watching your tone when you're tired. It means softening when you want to snap. It means staying when your ego wants to run. And that doesn't just apply to romantic love. It applies to friendships, to family, to leadership, to parenting, to every single relationship that truly matters. Emotional safety is what allows people to grow, to admit when they're wrong, to ask for help, to own their shadows without fear of being erased. And the moment that safety is broken, when a reaction is too harsh, when a silence is too cold, when vulnerability is met with distance, the relationship shifts. Trust shrinks, honesty retracts. People start measuring their words, editing their truth. And that space, once filled with connection, begins to feel hollow. That's why safety must be intentional. It's not just about being kind when things are good. It's about being kind when things are hard. It's about how you react when someone disappoints you. It's about how you sit with someone's fear without trying to rush them out of it. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to stay. Because often, it's not your advice that heals them. It's your presence. It's your calmness. It's your refusal to turn away when their truth is messy. People won't remember everything you said, but they will never forget how safe you made them feel. And here's the real beauty: when you give that to someone else, something in you heals too. Because offering safety to others creates it within yourself. It rewires the fear, it breaks the cycle. It says, I can be real, you can be real, and we'll still be okay. That's what everyone longs for. That's what builds unshakable bonds. Not loud declarations, not perfect performance, but quiet, grounded safety. Be that for others. And watch how everything changes. Chapter 10, The Power of Listening, Hearing Beyond Words. In a world where everyone wants to be heard, very few know how to listen. Most people hear to respond, not to understand. They listen with their reply already forming in their mind. They interrupt not because they don't care, but because they feel unheard themselves. And over time, real connection slips through the cracks. Listening isn't passive. It's not silence while the other person speaks. It's not waiting for your turn. Listening is an active act of love. It's the choice to put your ego aside long enough to make space for someone else's truth. Social intelligence begins here, not with talking, but with listening. Because when you really listen, you don't just understand their words. You begin to understand their wounds, their fears, their needs that they don't know how to say aloud. A person's voice carries more than information. It carries their emotion. And when you listen, not just with your ears, but with your full presence, you hear what they're not saying too. The pauses, the tone, the tremble, the sigh between sentences. That's where the truth often lives. People are starving for that kind of attention. To be listened to without judgment. To speak without performance. To be received, not corrected.
And yet, it's so rare.
We live in a noisy world. Opinions shouted, reactions triggered, answers thrown out before the question is even understood. In that chaos, someone who listens deeply becomes magnetic. Because they become a mirror, not reflecting judgment, but clarity. Not offering a solution, but offering space. People feel safe with them. They open up. They soften. Because finally someone is not trying to fix them. Someone is simply with them. And that kind of presence is healing. Most of the time, people don't need advice. They just need to be heard. They already know what they need to do. They just need someone to sit with them long enough so their own wisdom can surface. But to be that kind of listener, you have to let go of your need to control the conversation. Let go of your need to be right. Let go of your impulse to fill every silence. Let go of your own anxiety about not being heard, and trust that your time to speak will come. You have to become quiet enough inside to hold someone else's storm. This takes practice. It takes emotional regulation. Because when someone says something triggering, your first instinct will be to defend, to explain, to correct, to protect yourself. But if you can breathe through that moment, if you can stay with them instead of with your own reaction, you build a connection most people never experience. That's listening. It's not always comfortable, but it's always powerful. When you listen well, you become someone people trust, someone people return to, because they know, here, I don't have to perform. Here, I can be messy. Here, my voice matters. That kind of relationship becomes rare, sacred, because it's based on presence, not perfection. And here's what most people miss. Listening doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean letting go of your truth. It means honoring theirs before you offer yours. Because once someone feels heard, then they're ready to hear you. But not before. That's the mistake most make. They rush in to fix, teach, or convince before the other person has even felt understood. And the moment someone feels misunderstood, they stop listening. Not just to your words, but to your heart. So if you want to be a master of social intelligence, practice this one thing. Listen like it's the only thing that matters. Because in that moment, it is no distraction, no multitasking, no mental rehearsals, just full, steady, quiet presence. You will be amazed what opens up. People will tell you things they've never told anyone. Not because you pried, but because your stillness gave them permission to finally speak their truth. Listening is not about sound. It's about presence. And in that presence, entire lives can begin to shift. Chapter 11, Projection. When people show you themselves through you. Sometimes when someone attacks you, criticizes you, misunderstands you, it has nothing to do with you. It's their own wounds speaking, their own pain, still unhealed, their own reflection, distorted, their own inner conflict, pushed outward. This is projection. Projection is when someone cannot face a part of themselves, so they assign it to you. Your confidence triggers their insecurity. Your silence triggers their abandonment. Your truth triggers their denial. And before you realize it, you're being blamed for storms that never started in your sky. Social intelligence is being able to spot that, to pause in moments of tension and say internally, wait, does this really belong to me? Because if you don't, you'll carry pain that was never yours. You'll defend yourself in arguments that were never meant for you. You'll twist your truth to avoid triggering someone else's illusion. And over time, that wears you down. Here's what people don't talk about. When someone projects onto you, they don't always know they're doing it. They may even believe they're right. Because the human brain protects the ego at all costs. And one of the easiest ways it does that, by outsourcing blame. It sounds like, you think you're better than everyone. You always make me feel small. You're just like the rest. You don't care. But if you look closer, you'll see the pattern. They felt insecure before you arrived. They felt abandoned long before your silence. They carried that pain long before you ever spoke. You just touched it. You became the mirror. And when people aren't ready to face their own reflection, they smash the mirror instead. That's why so many attacks feel confusing. Because you're not doing anything wrong. You're simply reminding someone of the work they haven't done. This is where emotional maturity becomes your shield. You learn not to personalize everything. You learn to ask, what's mine to carry, and what's not. You learn to hold your ground, without collapsing into guilt or over-explaining. Because here's the truth. When someone accuses you unfairly, it's not an invitation to change your nature. It's an invitation to protect your peace. But this doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming clear. You can see their pain without making it your fault. You can have empathy without losing your boundaries. You can stay kind without becoming a sponge for everyone's mess. This is the mastery, staying grounded while others are projecting. It's not easy, especially if you're someone who's been conditioned to keep the peace. Especially if you're someone who equates criticism with danger. Especially if, in your past, someone made you feel responsible for their emotions. But healing teaches you this. You are not responsible for someone else's unhealed trauma. Yes, you may trigger it, but you didn't cause it. And it's not your job to fix it. People must face themselves. This is where deep strength grows. You no longer absorb every emotion thrown at you. You no longer twist yourself into shapes to be understood. You no longer perform calmness, so someone else feels comfortable. Instead, you become clear, solid, still, Because you know who you are. And when someone projects onto you, you can gently return their pain back to them. Not with anger, not with shame, but with quiet, unwavering truth. That's not mine. And in that moment, you reclaim your power. You stop being a container for confusion. You stop being a character in someone else's unresolved script. You stop being a substitute for their shadow. You become yourself again. Free, rooted, unshaken. Chapter 12. The Mastery of Self. Living with Grace in a Noisy World. When everything around you is loud, the quiet person becomes a mystery. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned the difference between noise and truth. The journey through human behavior and social intelligence is not about becoming more likable. It's about becoming undeniably rooted, unshakable, clear, soft where it matters, strong where it counts. It's about understanding what drives people not just in their words but in their wounds, and then choosing how to respond without becoming tangled in their chaos. You've seen it now. How fear shapes voices, and silence speaks louder than rage. How safety builds love, and listening builds trust. How presence becomes power. But what does mastery look like? It's not perfection. It's not being right all the time. It's not knowing every answer. It's knowing yourself so deeply, so compassionately, that you can walk into any room and still belong to yourself, even when misunderstood, even when rejected, even when unseen. Because now you see you. You understand the architecture of your own heart. You've mapped the blind spots. You've sat with the shadows. You've walked through your own inner weather and survived. So when someone else brings a storm, you don't collapse. You hold your center. You become the calm. That is the final layer of emotional and social mastery, not just reacting less, but responding with wisdom. Responding with restraint when provoked. Responding with clarity when challenged. Responding with grace when hurt. Not because you're weak, but because you know what peace costs, and you're no longer willing to trade it for approval. This is not the path most choose. Most chase being right, or being adored, or being dominant. But you've chosen presence. You've chosen clarity. You've chosen depth. And in a world that celebrates speed, drama, and volume, that makes you rare. That makes you unforgettable. Because people may forget what you said. They may forget what you did. But they will never forget how you made them feel. Safe, seen, heard, held. You didn't have to perform. You just had to be. You now understand how people behave. But more than that, you understand why. You see what most miss. You hear what most ignore. You speak less, but with more weight. And when people come to you now, they feel it. The steadiness, the depth, the quiet power of someone who knows themselves. Not to impress, not to manipulate, but to hold space for themselves and for others. So as you move forward, don't aim to be loud. Aim to be clear. Don't aim to be followed. Aim to be felt. Don't aim to win arguments. Aim to understand. Because in the end, the greatest form of intelligence is this: grace. Grace in how you carry pain. Grace in how you handle people. Grace in how you protect your peace without burning down the room. That's the real mastery. And if this journey has meant something to you, if you felt seen, strengthened, or softened by it, then stay close. Because this is just one chapter of many. Subscribe to the voice that spoke to you here. Because more is coming, and your story is just beginning. Thank you for listening.